Hello, my dear learners. I welcome you all to the lecture series of Database Management System once again. Already we have started your modeling and hope you are following my lectures. If you have got any doubt, please write below in the comment section. Now, already we have seen what are attributes and what are the different types of attributes. And also we have discussed the keys concept in details. Now we are going to see the basic thing about your model, which is entity. Entity means any tangible or intangible object about which I want to keep information in the database. I will tell you in details what we mean by entity actually in database management system. And also we will see integrity constraints, and that also I will explain. Integrity means truthfulness and constraints means restrictions. So we are imposing some restriction on the database to maintain the truthfulness of the database. That's why what are those integrity constraints that we have to analyze in detail. So in this lecture we are going to see what are the different types of entity, and we will see what are the different types of integrity constraint. So stay tuned and let's start.
Now we will see what is strong entity and weak entity. Actually, entities can either exist on their own or they can only exist when associated with some other entity type. And accordingly, the first type will be called as strong entity and the second type will be called as weak entity. Now let's understand strong entity in much more details. So what is a strong entity? Strong entity is that entity whose existence does not depend on any other entity. It is an independent one. A strong entity, it can be uniquely identified naturally by its own attributes because it doesn't have to depend on any other entity for its existence. Like, for example, students enrolled in different courses. I have indicated the participation also, total participation and partial participation. And this participation already I have discussed with you in my previous lecture. So those who have missed my previous lecture, please go through it. Then definitely will understand this participation. And also I have discussed over the cardinality. As I am showing in this diagram aim and in, this indicates that students and courses, these two entities have got relationship cardinality equal to m is to n. So these two things already I have discussed. Now, as you can see, the strong entity, it's represented by a single rectangle, like students, courses, they are strong entity because they can exist alone. And the relationship between two strong entities is represented by this single diamond. Then what is weak entity? Weak entity is that entity set which does not have independent existence. For example, there can be a room only if building exists, isn't it? Otherwise, without a building, no room can exist. It's just like that. Because there is no independent existence of a room unless a building is associated with it, right? Similarly, weak entity is that kind of entity. Now, strong entity has a key attribute, whereas the weak entity, it doesn't have a key attribute because we cannot give any attributes which sufficiently or uniquely identify records of weak entity, right? So how a weak entity will be getting its primary key? A weak entity, basically, it has got partial key, which is called discriminators. These discriminators, along with the key attribute of the strong entity, will act as a primary key for the weak entity. Let's see with an example. Now, in this diagram, here you can see an employee may or may not have any dependent. Okay, but a dependent, whenever he or she is existing, then dependent must be associated with an employee. Because a dependent cannot exist without an employee. So we can call dependent as the weak entity and employee as the strong entity. And whenever we are showing the relationship between strong and weak entity. We are showing it by a double diamond symbol, which I have indicated over here as identifying relationship. I will explain to you what is identified relationship. So whenever I am showing any relationship between strong and weak entity, then we must have given this double diamond to show the relationship between them, and there must be a total participation between this relation and the dependent or the weak entity. So weak entity must have total participation. Okay, so basically again you can see from here a double rectangle is used for representing the weak entity set, and a double diamond symbol is used for representing the relationship among a strong and weak entity. This relationship is also called identifying relationship. Why it is called identifying relationship? It is also called existence dependency. I will tell you in a short while. And also another very important point that you may note over here, that the strong entity, since it has got a particular primary key, so it is represented by an attribute employee ID, as I have indicated over here, with an underline given. So underline given means its primary key. Whereas if you look at the dependent entity, which is the weak entity, so it has got a discriminator, because as I already mentioned, that weak entity doesn't have any attribute which can serve as the primary key. Instead, a weak entity will have discriminator. Okay, so the discriminator of this weak entity dependent is given by name, which is shown by dashed line. So dashed line indicates that it's not a primary key, it's just a discriminator. So how I will show the primary key of this weak entity dependent? Then dependent will have employee ID and name of the dependent as the primary key. Understood? Of dependent. Understood? So dependent will have a primary key equal to employee ID and name. And this relation, which is shown in this case, that is called existence dependency, because an instance of weak entity cannot exist without the existence of some other strong entity, isn't it? So existence dependency means what? Existence dependency means that an instance of weak entity cannot exist without the existence of some other strong entity. And a weak entity depends on the strong entity for its existence, whereas a strong entity has its own independent existence. Isn't it? Next, we will see integrity constraint. What do we mean by integrity constraint? Now, integrity constraints are predefined set of rules which is given on the table structure so that the integrity and consistency of the data present in the table, that is maintained. We are imposing this constraint. Two main integrity constraints which we can impose, that is entity integrity, and second one is referential integrity. Now, what do we mean by entity integrity? The entity integrity rule says that neither the primary key nor any part of it can contain null values. That means neither the primary key nor any part of the primary key can contain null values. Example, suppose in the employee table, whenever I am saying that primary key cannot be null, so I should not choose phone number as the primary key, because some people may not have telephone number, isn't it? That's why if that person doesn't have mobile number or phone number, definitely I have to give null values, and null values is not allowed for primary key. That's why you should not choose phone number as the primary key. Now, if you look at the second part, which is nor any part of the primary key should contain null values. Now look at this table. In student marks, roll number, subject code, and marks. These are the three attributes of this student marks table. Now this is a composite primary key. Roll number and subject code taken together. So either roll number or subject code, neither of them can be null. Roll number cannot be null, or subject code also cannot be null. Because if one attribute is given null, that means the other attribute alone cannot determine any row. This is called entity integrity. Next integrity constraint that we will discuss, which is very important, which is referential integrity. Now, referential integrity rule says that a foreign key, it is always related to foreign key and primary key relationship. It says that a foreign key must have a matching primary key value or it must be wholly null. It means that the reference from a row in one table to another table, where actually you are referring foreign key from a particular table to another table, right? Foreign key is nothing but a reference key between these two tables. Then a reference must be valid. So let me give you an example, then you will better understand what we mean by this. See, over here we have got a department table. In this department table, we have got department ID and department name. D101, 102 and 103, and the department name is IT, Accounting and HR. Also, I have given an employee table, employee ID, first name, mobile number, but that employee must be allocated to any department. So what I'm giving, this department ID is serving as the foreign key because it was the primary key of this table. So it is serving as a foreign key in this table. Okay, so referential integrity constraint now states that the department ID in this employee table must have a matching department ID value in the department table. That means only those values which are there in the department table, that values will be only allowed. Like D101, D102 and D103. Only 3 department IDs are specified in the department table. So whenever you are using this department ID in the employee table as foreign key, only 101, D101, D102 and D103 is allowed. Suppose if you have given any employee ID E103 or E104 to department D104, since D104 does not exist, that's why you cannot give. Either you can give null value, that is also allowed in the department ID of the foreign key as foreign key, but not as primary key. So either null values in the foreign key is allowed, or if you are giving any value, that must have a matching value in the primary key table. So with this, I'm concluding my lecture, my dear learners. Hope you are enjoying this lecture. So I will see you in my next video. So stay tuned and stay healthy and happy.